Sharecropping is a system of agriculture in which a landowner allows a tenant to use the land in return for a share of the crops produced on the land. Sharecropping has a long history and there are a wide range of different situations and types of agreements that have used a form of the system. Some are governed by tradition, and others by law. Legal contract systems such as the Italian mezzadria, the French métayage, the Spanish mediero, or the Islamic system of muqasat, occur widely. Overview: sharecropping has benefits and costs for both the owners and the croppers. It encourages the cropper to remain on the land throughout the harvest season to work the land, solving the harvest rush problem. At the same time, since the cropper pays in shares of his harvest, owners and croppers share the risk of harvests being large or small and prices being high or low. Because tenants benefit from larger harvests, they have an incentive to work harder and invest in better methods than in a slave plantation system. However, by dividing the working force into many individual workers, large farms no longer benefit from economies of scale. On the whole, sharecropping was not as economically efficient as the gang agriculture of slave plantations. In the U.S., tenant farmers own their own mules and equipment, and sharecroppers do not, and thus sharecroppers are poorer and of lower status. Sharecropping occurred extensively in colonial Africa, Scotland, and Ireland and came into wide use in the southern United States during the Reconstruction era. The South had been devastated by war. Planters had ample land but little money for wages or taxes. At the same time, most of the former slaves had labor but no money and no land. They rejected the kind of gang labor that typified slavery. A solution was the sharecropping system focused on cotton, which was the only crop that could generate cash for the croppers, landowners, merchants and the tax collector. Poor white farmers, who previously had done little cotton farming, needed cash as well and became sharecroppers. Jeffrey Page made a distinction between centralized sharecropping found on cotton plantations and the decentralized sharecropping with other crops. The former is characterized by political conservatism and long-lasting tenure. Tenants are tied to the landlord through the plantation store. Their work is heavily supervised as slave plantations were. This form of tenure tends to be replaced by wage slavery as markets penetrate. Decentralized sharecropping involves virtually no role for the landlord, plots are scattered, peasants manage their own labor and the landowners do not manufacture the crops. Leases are very short, which leads to peasant radicalism. This form of tenure becomes more common when markets penetrate. Use of the sharecropper system has also been identified in England. It is still used in many rural poor areas today, notably in Pakistan and India. Although there is a perception that sharecropping was exploitative, evidence from around the world suggests that sharecropping is often a way for differently endowed enterprises to pool resources to mutual benefit, overcoming credit restraints and helping to manage risk. It can have more than a passing similarity to serfdom or indenture, and has therefore been seen as an issue of land reform in contexts such as the Mexican Revolution. However, Nyambura states that Eurocentric historiographical devices such as feudalism or slavery, often qualified by weak prefixes like semi or quasi, are not helpful in understanding the antecedents and functions of sharecropping in Africa. Sharecropping agreements can however be made fairly, as a form of tenant farming or share farming that is a variable rental payment, paid in arrears. There are three different types of contracts. Workers can rent plots of land from the owner for a certain sum and keep the whole crop. Workers work on the land and earn a fixed wage from the landowner but keep some of the crop. No money changes hands, but the worker and landowner each keep a share of the crop. Advantages: the advantages of sharecropping in other situations include enabling access for women to arable land where ownership rights are vested only in men. Page pointed out that sharecropping was economically inefficient in a free market. However, many outside factors make it efficient. One factor is slave emancipation. Sharecropping provided the freed slaves of the USA, Brazil and the late Roman Empire with land access. It is efficient also as a way of escaping inflation, hence its rise in 16th-century France and Italy. Landlords opt for sharecropping to avoid the administrative costs and shirking that occurs on plantations and haciendas. It is preferred to cash tenancy because cash tenants take all the risks, and any harvest failure will hurt them and not the landlord. Therefore, they tend to demand lower rents than sharecroppers. Disadvantages: the disadvantages of sharecropping, however, soon became apparent. A new system of credit, the crop lien, became closely associated with sharecropping. Under this system, a planter or merchant extended a line of credit to the sharecropper while taking the euro unregistered trademark S-crop as collateral. The sharecropper could then draw food and supplies all year long. When the crop was harvested, the planter or merchants who held the lien sold the harvest for the sharecropper and settled the debt. Regions: Africa. In settler colonies of colonial Africa, sharecropping was a feature of the agricultural life. White farmers, who owned most of the land, were frequently unable to work the whole of their farm for lack of capital. They therefore allowed African farmers to work the excess on a sharecropping basis. In South Africa, the 1913 Natives Land Act outlawed the ownership of land by Africans in areas designated for white ownership and effectively reduced the status of most sharecroppers to tenant farmers and then to farm laborers. In the 1960s, generous subsidies to white farmers meant that most farmers could afford to work their entire farms, and sharecropping faded out. The arrangement has reappeared in other African countries in modern times, including Ghana and Zimbabwe. United States of America. Sharecropping became widespread as a response to economic upheaval caused by the end of slavery during and after Reconstruction. Sharecropping was a way for very poor farmers to earn a living from land owned by someone else. The landowner provided land, housing, tools and seed, and perhaps a mule, and a local merchant loaned money for food and supplies. At harvest time the sharecropper received a share of the crop, which paid off his debt to the merchant. By the late 1860s white farmers also became sharecroppers. The system was distinct from that of the tenant farmer, who rented the land, provided his own tools and mule, and received half the crop. Landowners provided more supervision to sharecroppers, and less or none to tenant farmers. Sharecropping in the United States probably originated in the Natchez district, roughly centered in Adams County, Mississippi with its county seat, Natchez. The freedmen had no land or money or work animals. The Federal Army's Freedmen's Bureaus helped find jobs or farm work for them. Sharecroppers worked a section of the plantation independently, usually growing cotton, tobacco, rice, and other cash crops and received a small portion of the parcel's output. Although the sharecropping system was primarily a post-Civil War development, it did exist in antebellum Mississippi, especially in the northeastern part of the state, an area with few slaves or plantations, and most likely existed in Tennessee. Sharecropping, along with tenant farming, was a dominant form in the Cotton South from the 1870s to the 1950s, among both blacks and whites, but it has largely been disappearing since 1966 when civil rights and the workers' union had abolished peonage. After the war, plantation owners had to borrow money to produce crops. Interest rates on these loans were around 15%. The indebtedness of cotton planters increased through the early 1940s, and the average plantation fell into bankruptcy about every 20 years. It is against this backdrop that the wealthiest owners maintained their concentrated ownership of the land. In Reconstruction-era United States, sharecropping was one of few options for penniless freedmen to conduct subsistence farming and support themselves and their families. Other solutions included the crop lien system, a rent labor system, and the wage system. Sharecropping was by far the most economically efficient, as it provided incentives for workers to produce a bigger harvest. It was a stage beyond simple hired labor, because the sharecropper had an annual contract. During Reconstruction, the Federal Freedmen's Bureau ordered the arrangements and wrote and enforced the contracts. Croppers were assigned a plot of land to work, and in exchange owed the owner a share of the crop at the end of the season, usually one half. The owner provided the tools and farm animals. Farmers who owned their own mule and plow were at a higher stage and are called tenant farmers. They paid the landowner less, usually only a third of each crop. In both cases the farmer kept the produce of gardens. The sharecropper purchased seed, tools and fertilizer, as well as food and clothing, on credit from a local merchant, or sometimes from a plantation store. When the harvest came, the cropper would harvest the whole crop and sell it to the merchant who had extended credit. Purchases and the landowner's share were deducted and the cropper kept the difference euro, or added to his debt. Though the arrangement protected sharecroppers from the negative effects of a bad crop, many sharecroppers were economically confined to serf-like conditions of poverty. To work the land, sharecroppers had to buy seed and implements, sometimes from the plantation owner who often charged exorbitant prices against the sharecropper's next season. Arrangements also typically gave half or less of the crop to the sharecropper, and the sale price in some cases was set by the landowner. Lacking the resources to market his crops independently, the sharecropper was sometimes compensated in scrip redeemable only at the plantation. Thus the cost of production and price of sale were both largely controlled by the landowner, with the sharecropper having little, if any, margin for profit. These factors made sharecroppers dependent on the plantation owners in a way that perpetuated some of the aspects of slavery, and in the late 19th century maintained a stable, low-cost workforce that replaced slave labor. It was the bottom rung in the Southern tenancy ladder. By the early 1930s there were 5.5 million white tenants, sharecroppers, and mixed cropping laborers in the United States, and 3 million blacks. In Tennessee, whites made up 2/3 or more of the sharecroppers. In Mississippi, by 1900, 36% of all white farmers were tenants or sharecroppers, while 85% of black farmers were. Sharecropping continued to be a significant institution in Tennessee agriculture for more than 60 years after the Civil War, peaking in importance in the early 1930s, when sharecroppers operated approximately 1/3 of all farm units in the state. The situation of landless farmers who challenged the system in the rural South as late as 1941 has been described thus: he is at once a target subject of ridicule and vitriolic denunciation. He may even be waylaid by hooded or unhooded leaders of the community, some of whom may be public officials. If a white man persists in causing trouble, the night riders may pay him a visit, or the officials may haul him into court. If he is a Negro, a mob may hunt him down. Sharecroppers formed unions in the 1930s, beginning in Tallapoosa County, Alabama in 1931, and Arkansas in 1934. Membership in the Southern Tenant Farmers Union included both blacks and poor whites. As leadership strengthened, meetings became more successful, and protest became more vigorous. Landlords responded with a wave of terror. Sharecroppers' strikes in Arkansas and the Boonville of Missouri, the 1939 Missouri sharecroppers' strike, were documented in the film O Freedom After While. The plight of a sharecropper was addressed in the song Sharecropper's Blues recorded by Charlie Barnett and his orchestra with vocals by K-Star in 1944. It was re-recorded and released by Capitol with Star being backed by the Dave Cavanaugh Orc. Decca then reissued the Barnett Star recording. In the 1930s and 1940s, increasing mechanization virtually brought the institution of sharecropping to an end in the United States. The sharecropping system in the U.S. increased during the Great Depression with the creation of tenant farmers following the failure of many small farms throughout the Dust Bowl. Traditional sharecropping declined after mechanization of farm work became economical in the mid-20th century. As a result, many sharecroppers were forced off the farms, and migrated to the industrialized North to work in factories, or become migrant workers in the western United States during World War II. Sharecropping agreements: typically, a sharecropping agreement would specify which party was expected to cover certain expenses, like seed, fertilizer, weed control, irrigation district assessments, and fuel. Sometimes the sharecropper covered those costs, but they expected a larger share of the crop in return. The agreement would also indicate whether the sharecropper would use his own equipment to raise the crops, or use the landlord's equipment. The agreement would also indicate whether the landlord would pick up his or her share of the crop in the field or whether the sharecropper would deliver it. For example, a landowner may have a sharecropper farming an irrigated hayfield. The sharecropper uses his own equipment, and covers all the costs of fuel and fertilizer. The landowner pays the irrigation district assessments and does the irrigating himself. The sharecropper cuts and bales the hay, and delivers 1/3 of the baled hay to the landlord's feedlot. The sharecropper might also leave the landlord's share of the baled hay in the field, where the landlord would fetch it when he wanted hay. Another arrangement could have the sharecropper delivering the landlord's share of the product to market, in which case the landlord would get his share in the form of the sale proceeds. In that case, the agreement should indicate the timing of the delivery to market, which can have a significant effect on the ultimate price of some crops. The market timing decision should probably be decided shortly before harvest, so that the landlord has more complete information about the area's harvest, to determine whether the crop will earn more money immediately after harvest, or whether it should be stored until the price rises. Market timing can entail storage costs and losses to spoilage as well, for some crops. Farmers' cooperatives. Cooperative farming exists in many forms throughout the United States, Canada, and the rest of the world. Various arrangements can be made through collective bargaining or purchasing to get the best deals on seeds, supplies, and equipment. For example, members of a farmers' cooperative who cannot afford heavy equipment of their own can lease them for nominal fees from the cooperative. Farmers' cooperatives can also allow groups of small farmers and dairymen to manage pricing and prevent undercutting by competitors. Economic theories of shared tenancy. The theory of shared tenancy was long dominated by Alfred Marshall's famous footnote in Book 6, Chapter 1014 of Principles, where he illustrated the inefficiency of agricultural share contracting. Stephen N. S. Chung challenged this view, showing that with sufficient competition and in the absence of transaction costs, shared tenancy will be equivalent to competitive labor markets and therefore efficient. He also showed that in the presence of transaction costs, share contracting may be preferred to either wage contracts or rent contracts due to the mitigation of labor shirking and the provision of risk sharing. Joseph Stiglitz suggested that if shared tenancy is only a labor contract, then it is only pairwise efficient, and that land-to-the-tiller reform would improve social efficiency by removing the necessity for labor contracts in the first place. Reed, Murrell, Ramasset and Allen and Lewick provided transaction cost theories of share contracting, wherein tenancy is more of a partnership than a labor contract and both landlord and tenant provide multiple inputs. It has been also argued that the sharecropping institution can be explained by factors such as informational asymmetry, moral hazard, intertemporal discounting, price fluctuations or limited liability. See also, convict lease, wage slavery, peonage, rural tenancy, share farming, share milking, footnotes. Further reading, Adams, Jane, and D. Gorton, This Land Unregistered Trademark T. My Land, The Eviction of Sharecroppers by the Farms Security Administration, Agricultural History, 83. 323 €51. Allon, D.W. and D. Lewick. Contract Choice in Modern Agriculture, Cash Rent vs. Crop Share, Journal of Law and Economics, v. 35, ppA 397 €426. Barbagalo, Tricia. Black Beach, The Mucklands of Canastota, New York. Retrieved June 4, 2008. Davis, Ronald L. F. Good and Faithful Labor, From Slavery to Sharecropping in the Natchez District, 1860–1890 Westport, Connecticut, Greenwood Press, 1982, Furlegger, Louis. Sharecropping Contracts in the Late 19th Century South, Agricultural History Volume 67, No. 3, ppA 31 €46 in JSTOR, Garrett, Martin A., and Zanharizu. The Efficiency of Sharecropping, Evidence from the Postbellum South, Southern Economic Journal, Volume 69, 2003, Grubbs, Donald H. Cry from the Cotton, The Southern Tenant Farmers Union and the New Deal, Hurt, R. Douglas Hurt. African American Life in the Rural South, 1900–1950, Leibowitz, Jonathan J. Tenants, Sharecroppers, and the French Agricultural Depression of the Late 19th Century, Journal of Interdisciplinary History, Volume 19, No. 3, ppA 429 €445 in JSTOR. Reed, Jr., Joseph D. Sharecropping in History and Theory, Agricultural History Volume 49, Number 2, ppA 426 Euro 440 and JSTOR, Roll, Jarrod. Out Yonder on the Road Working Class Self-Representation and the 1939 Roadside Demonstration in Southeast Missouri, Southern Spaces, March 16, 2010. SouthernSpaces.org, Shaban, R.A. Testing Between Competing Models of Sharecropping, Journal of Political Economy, 95, 5, ppA 893 Euro 920. Singh, N. Theories of Sharecropping, in P. Barton ed., The Economic Theory of Agrarian Institutions, ppA 33 Euro 72. Southworth, Caleb. Aid to Sharecroppers, How Agrarian Class Structure and Tenant Farmer Politics Influenced Federal Relief in the South, 1933 Euro 1935, Social Science History, Volume 26, Number 1, ppA 33 Euro 70, Stiglitz, J. Incentives and Risk Sharing in Sharecropping, Review of Economic Studies, v. 41 219 Euro 255. Turner, Howard A. Farm Tenancy Distribution and Trends in the United States, Law and Contemporary Problems, Volume 4, Number 4, Farm Tenancy, ppA 424 Euro 433 and JSTOR, Wirtz, Nancy. The Efficiency of Southern Tenant Plantations, 1900 Euro 1945, Journal of Economic History, Volume 51, Number 2, ppA 385 Euro 395 and JSTOR, Wayne, Michael. A Reshaping of Plantation Society, The Natchez District, 1860–1880 Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Louisiana State University Press, 1983.